Hello, chess fans. Today, we're exploring a lesser-known but super interesting opening, the Smet Gambit. Game 1 starts with e4, d6, d4, e5, d takes e5, knight to c6, e takes d6, bishop takes d6, knight to f3, bishop to g4, bishop to e2, queen to e7. My opponent develops the knight to c3, long castle. Short castle. I capture the pawn on h2 with my bishop, delivering a check. My opponent takes the bishop with their king. I then capture their queen with my rook. They respond by capturing my rook. I simplified the position further by capturing their knight. In response, my opponent took my bishop. I slide my queen to h4, delivering a check. The king moves to g1. I develop my knight to f6. g3. I move my queen to h3. Bishop to g2. I retreat my queen to e6. My opponent plays f4. I move my queen to g4. They respond rook to f3. Knight to d4. Rook to e3. I capture the pawn on c2, forking the two rooks. My opponent decides to resign. Game 2 starts with e4. d6. d4. e5. d takes e5. Knight to c6. e takes d6. Bishop takes d6. Knight to c3. Queen to e7. Knight to f3. Bishop to g4. Bishop to e2. Long castle. My opponent advances their knight to d5. I capture the pawn on e4 with my queen. My opponent develops their bishop to e3. I move my bishop to b4, delivering a check. c3. I capture the knight on d5 with my rook, attacking the queen. The queen moves to b3. I shift my bishop to c5. We exchange bishops. Short castle. I capture the bishop on e2 with my queen. My opponent then captures on f7. I take the knight on f3 with my bishop. They play rook a to e1. I move my queen to c4. My opponent slides their rook to e8, delivering a check. I block the check with my knight. My opponent captures my bishop. I move my queen to d5, proposing a queen trade. In this position, can you find the best move for white? It's rook to d1. If I capture the queen, white takes on d8, delivering checkmate. Back to the game. My opponent moves their queen to g4, delivering a check. I block with my queen. We exchange rooks. My opponent then slides their rook to d1. I move my rook to d5. We exchange rooks again. My opponent resigns. Game 3 starts with d4, d6, e4, e5, d takes e5, knight to c6, e takes d6, bishop takes d6, c3, queen to e7. My opponent develops their bishop to d3. I move my knight to f6. They play f3. I develop my bishop to d7. My opponent then shifts their knight to e2. Long castle. Short castle. I advance my knight to e5. My opponent moves their queen to c2. I capture the bishop. They then slide their bishop to g5. I retreat my knight back to e5. f4. Knight to g6. e5. I capture the pawn on e5 with my knight. My opponent takes the knight. I respond by capturing the pawn on e5 with my queen. My opponent shifts their bishop to f4, targeting my queen. I slide my queen to c5, delivering a check. We then exchange bishops. I move my queen to c4, eyeing the rook. My opponent overlooks my plan and plays b3. I capture the rook on f1 with my queen, delivering checkmate. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you can stay updated with all our latest content.